I'm
Okay.
ready.
Excellent. Well, it's great to meet you. Thank you so much for taking a minute out today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You bet. So the one thing about your world and healthcare, I'm curious, surviving that pandemic and getting through that time period, how many ripples and waves have been created that you're still feeling from living through that time period?
Um, well, as far as the organization that I have, UTI Health Alliance, I don't know that the pandemic really affected it so much. I just feel like everyone has some sort of a response to what happened for all those years, and we're just trying to get back up on our feet. So, fortunately, my community, maybe this is one good thing, they haven't had a big ripple effect from the pandemic in particular, which is
Okay.
good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is good. So let
hmm
me ask you this. To get to the core of what you do for patient as a patient advocate, I want to know this. If I put you in front of a bunch of third grade students at career day and one of the kids was curious as to what you do on a daily basis, and they're like, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" How would you answer them?
That's a great question. First time I've contemplated that question. Um, I would say I help people and I help the medical and research organizations to fill the gaps between what research knows and what's currently being clinically practiced and being taught. So I really want to get the gap filled as far as like information, knowledge, those kinds of things. I'm certainly not answering to a third grader, I just realized.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine.
And then we just really want to provide education, especially to the public. This is such an epidemic right now. I might even go as far as to say it's a pandemic. So when you ask about pandemic, maybe that's what it does sit here in this space. But 404 million people will get this illness this year around the world. It's tremendously common, and women get it in far greater numbers than men. And it isn't just a pesky little woman's infection. It can be quite devastating, completely dismantling people's lives and then causing mental health issues. And then also, people tend to feel sometimes suicidal because of it. And
Yeah.
we have lost people to suicide this past year. So, yeah, it's very serious. The testing and treatment right now is not helpful. It may be helpful to somebody who's getting their first or second infection, but for someone who's got recurrent or chronic infections, the current treatment needs in the United States needs a big update.
Yeah.
And also the testing, which is inaccurate. So if you've got an inaccurate test, how are you going to be able to diagnose your patient? So,
So let me ask you this. When you were in the third grade, what was your dream? Was it always medicine?
oh, I'm not in medicine. I'm a
Well,
musician.
okay. Oh,
Yeah.
okay. All
Yeah,
right.
I was a professional bassoonist.
Okay.
And then I became an interfaith minister. And then the illness got me in such a bad way that I had to stop working outside the home. And
Okay.
that was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And that's when I decided it's time to do something. There is no other patient
Yeah.
advocacy group in the US for this. And I just knew somebody had to help.
Yeah, I apologize. I meant to say being an advocate. I didn't mean directly in, but being kind of in that
Oh,
realm.
yeah.
Yeah. So take me back to where you were born and raised and how these seeds of being in music and becoming an advocate, how were all of these planted and harvested into who you are?
Oh, I love your questions.
Thank you.
Um, I grew up here in a suburb of Minneapolis, and my parents were both professional string players, violin and viola. My grandfather was a professional violist in the Chicago Symphony, and so it was really like the family thing.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of not to be questioned that we would also carry that on and choose our own instrument. I remember one time my mother said to me, "You can choose anything as long as it's violin, viola, cello, or piano." And I was like, uh-uh. So I went on to be a bassoonist, and I had a wonderful career doing that. Lots of wonderful, um, you know, recordings. I even got a chance to record with Janet Jackson one time and play with the Minnesota Opera and go on tours all around the world. So it was really fun. Um, but what happened for me was I started getting these UTIs, urinary tract infections, when I was about 2. So kind of almost pre-verbal in a way. I
Yeah.
don't remember my life without them.
Yeah.
So, and I guess things must have gotten a lot worse because by the time I was 4, I was starting to get some pretty traumatic procedures practiced on me that I've still experienced the trauma from those to this day. Um, and so, I'm working through that. And this work that I'm doing is really helping me work through that because it's making me face all of it and talk about it. And
Yeah.
that's what we need to do. We need to talk about it. Nobody's talking about the fact that their grandmother, sister, mother, friend, anyone born with female anatomy, and sometimes men, especially when they get older, are experiencing this.
Yeah.
Every time I mention it to anyone, anywhere, on the airplane, in the bathroom, yesterday I was this makeup artist for a photo shoot. Um, they tell me their story, either their own story or the story of a family member or friend that is so upsetting to hear
Yeah.
these stories, and um, nobody's doing anything to correct this. I wouldn't say nobody, but it just needs to happen.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
in this life of being a musician and
Hmm.
helping people and now being an advocate, who's been
Hmm.
that bedrock for you? Who's been that hero that's inspired and fueled you to be you?
Hmm. I would say it's definitely my mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you had asked before how those all kind of weave together.
Yeah.
And I would say that fundamentally the ministerial role is where I live on a daily basis, just for myself. I don't have to be out there ministering to anyone, but just kindness, practicing kindness.
Yeah.
And so I feel music. I don't know. I guess I feel music kind of rooted me in that.
Yeah.
I had such beauty around me when I was growing up with the music. And so I have this real need to be helpful in a meaningful way. So I think that's how they work together.
Yeah.
So, and what was the second question that you had just asked me? Oh, my role model, my mother.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So my mom wore all hats, and so she was a professional violist in the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. And, um, you know, it was just great to see her up on stage all the time growing up, and that was fun. And she also was deeply spiritual, and she studied something called A Course in Miracles. And it was kind of her spiritual path. And by just being near her, it became my spiritual path as well. And that's what's kept me in, a kind place when sometimes either my own body or the world is not very kind.
Yeah.
And yeah. So, yeah, she's definitely my role model.
So it sounds like music has been kind of a saving grace for everything that you've gone through.
Music is my core. I mean, music is like you add something to who you really are, but music is really my core. If I could, if somebody asked me, what was your profession in your lifetime, I would say music.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one thing about jazz is one of my favorite instruments is the
Mm.
vibraphone. And it's not really a common instrument, but it holds a lot of power. And I would
Yeah.
imagine being a bassoonist has opened a lot of doors because it's kind of a niche kind of instrument that allows groups to kind of open the door up to you. And you
Mm.
probably have seen a lot of things that a lot of musicians may not be able to experience.
Well, that's so interesting. Well, certainly when I was growing up in high school, not so much college, but in high school, I had every opportunity in the world handed to me because really I was the only one doing
Yeah.
it. Right. But then I got into music conservatory. I went to Eastman School of Music, and it became really competitive. So there were these handful of people around the country who were so, so, so good. And then there are only maybe 1 or 2 orchestra jobs every year, right? So you're competing against those people and they're amazing. So I think that for a certain point it did open up a lot of doors, but then it just got hard.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So, talk to me a little bit about what is it that gets you to do this work that you do? You have to give a lot of yourself to help
Mhm.
people,
Mhm.
whether in the ministry or in being an advocate. how do you do that every day and then hold enough back to evolve as a human being yourself? What's that collective
Mhm.
energy for you every day?
Yeah, every day is really different. And I think that because of this illness, which I'm still experiencing, I've just gotten um, a lot of different treatments from around the world that have allowed me to be in a functional place, which is great. I'm
Yeah.
very grateful for that. Um, what was the question again?
It's really about what gives you the energy every day to do this, to
Oh,
give of
I think I
yourself.
have this weird, have you ever heard of the Enneagram?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So if I were going to place myself on that, I would say I'm a two, which is the helper.
Uh-huh.
And I just have this thing in me that I feel most satisfied when I'm doing something like this, when I'm doing something to help others, but also as it affects me, because certainly I started this because of my own lifelong experience. And I saw a need for somebody to fill a big gap. So, I think that also I do have to rest a lot, and I do take that very seriously. So working from home is great because then I can space things out and rest in between things. And that helps me tremendously. And, some days I can't work, some days I do tremendous amount of work. It just really depends on the day. Yeah.
Yeah. So as someone that's a patient advocate, what is one of your favorite success stories?
That's a hard question because we don't have a lot of success stories in our community.
I gotcha.
Because there's just not enough research funding, researchers,
Yeah.
and then the education that needs to trickle down from that to actual clinical practice. So I mean, for me personally, getting to meet a lot of the world's advocates in this space, I've been working with some wonderful groups in the UK and Australia, and just knowing that there are other people out there doing this, I feel like I have a team, which is really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and I think the main thing for my work right now is just to give people some hope.
Yeah.
There might not be hope for a cure at this moment, but there is hope to feel better enough to have a life because people are housebound.
Yeah.
They're bound to their bathrooms. They're just it's so painful. It's the most painful illness. I don't know. I had a child naturally without any medications, and I would call those really dark moments with UTI equally as painful.
Wow.
Yeah, and you don't have any help but for it to go away.
Yeah.
So yeah, and I don't think that our medical practice or medical teaching is aware of just how hard it is when you're sent home with a negative test result and that's how you feel. Oh, there's nothing wrong with you. Go home and do meditation.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, get psychological help, things like that. Those are what the patients hear. So,
Yeah.
my hope, I guess my most satisfying thing would be to make changes, at least in the way patients are received,
Yeah.
for for clinicians to believe them
Yeah.
because their symptoms are real.
So let me ask you this, with
Yeah.
everything that you know and everything you've experienced in your life, if you had a dream tonight, ran into the a younger version, 18-year-old version of you, you could give that version of you a piece of advice based on this life you've led, the wisdom you've gained along your journey. What advice would you give?
I would tell my 18-year-old self to stand up for herself in clinical settings, that there is no way that a doctor or anyone else is going to tell you you have to go through one more horrific procedure in order to get better. You don't have to say yes to these things. And that's what I would tell anyone who's going through this, but certainly myself, because I wish I had said no to a lot more.
So, of all of the things that you've done and evolved into and accomplished in your life, what are you ultimately the proudest of?
This work for
Yes.
sure. And I feel like I'm just getting started. We're just heading into our third year.
Yeah.
So, yeah, this work, I can't wait to look back in 10 years and see what happened.
Yeah.
Or
So,
20. Yeah.
yeah, for sure. So,
Yeah.
I'm curious, as a musician, what was the first live show you saw that blew you away?
always orchestral
Okay.
music. So it was my grandfather playing in the Chicago Symphony,
Yeah.
or my parents playing, in the chamber orchestra or the Minnesota Orchestra. It was just those concerts or the operas that I was always dragged to rehearsals because I was 6 and they didn't have a babysitter. So I remember sitting through the Crucible so many times. It was kind of a dark opera, but
Yeah.
I'll never forget it. Yeah.
Yeah. So at the end of the day, Laura, everyone has a perception of you, family, friends,
Hmm.
everybody that knows you, but ultimately you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Hmm. Well, I think that the most important thing to me is kindness. I would call that my spiritual practice. And so I would say that I'm kind whenever I can be. And if I'm not being kind, it's because I probably have blinders on and I'm going to work on it. But I try to be kind because that's how I'd like to treat myself. And
Yeah.
I'd like others to treat me that way as well. So yeah, that's the basic thing. I just want um, the sort of basic sort of love your neighbor thing to happen everywhere.
So if anyone out there is listening to this and they're on the fence and they want to get involved, they want to reach out, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is UTI Health Alliance.com. And there are support groups on that website where people can they're mostly on Facebook. They can their links, which is good. And there's a lot of information on their blogs and all kinds of things. And of course, you can get in touch with us as well through the website. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. Laura, this has been wonderful. I'm looking forward to getting this out and getting people your way. So thank you so much for your time. Have a wonderful holiday season.
Thank you. You as well. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you.